Hey everyone, and welcome to this week's episode of Fight Chat Friday. It's episode 182. And this week, we're going to have a look at something very, very interesting. We have, for the last year or so, been collecting information, statistics on the matches as the advent of, I suppose, live streaming has really kicked off. And as the live streaming services have improved, we start to see the scoreboard being better tracked. Initially, with just the flags red and blue, and now with the full scoreboard being available, we're able to get better information on each match live as it happened. We've also been tracking from our own data management the techniques being used, what's being thrown, what's making contact, looking at the stoppages, the restarts, all that kind of thing. And what we want to do today is bring, for the first time, a lot of these statistics together. So we're looking at 24, 25 fights over the last 12 months, all of them at European and World Championship level, all of them high-level competitors, and we want to see what we can learn from it.
Yeah, so we're going to have a look at a lot of numbers and kind of give you a sense of what this means and what this means for your practice, what this means for you as a competitor. So this is going to be valuable for coaches, for competitors, for everybody. Also for people who want to get an understanding of what the long-term goal is here in terms of performance, to reverse engineer of how they prepare for this, etc. So it's going to give a lot of information. We have 25 fights roughly that we have been tracking with some statistics. For us, that's a half of year of Fight Chat Friday episodes. So we have done a lot of study over the last while. So it's going to be interesting to pull some ideas and some numbers together and tell you guys what it means in the grand scheme of things.
Yeah, so let's start off with the granddaddy slide of them all that tells you the most important thing you need to do to win, which is wear blue sparring gear. Now, this one is very much in there as a joke. We don't have enough data to, you would assume that this will balance out over time. But over our data set, 58% of the winners were blue. But it's worth saying just, this is something that shouldn't matter. And we hope when we do cover enough fights, it doesn't matter. But it's just something to have marked there, and we'll keep an eye on it as things go on into the future. More seriously, though, so we have some averages. So this is taken across 24 matches, and these are averages taking into account the winner and the loser. So what we're seeing, and maybe Richie, you can talk to why some of these numbers are important as I go through them, but techniques thrown, 48 shots thrown per person into 2-minute rounds, which works out to be about 1 shot every 5 seconds for each competitor. So about every 2.5 seconds when you take both competitors into account.
Yeah, so when we look at this, it tells you that you need to have a very good work rate if you want to be able to score. We'll see later on how this actually works into percentage of shots being in contact and shots being scored. And this will tell us a little bit more information. So we'll wait until we get a little bit further into the numbers here to give you guys those takings and findings.
Yeah, then we jump into restart and decision flip. So the match is stopped and restarted 12.4 times on average. And there are 3 decision flips on average. That's when it changes from the match going towards red to the match going towards blue, or vice versa. And what that means is there are 15 or 16 times in a match where you have to stop, think to yourself what's important next, and have a plan of action that's adjusted based on the game state. So that is something you definitely need to be practicing. 15, 16 times on average in a match is quite a lot for 4 minutes of work.
Yeah, and the restarts then as well, what we want to be remembering is, except from the start of the round, which happens 2 times, we want to be aware of ring position, because that's very important, as we see later with warnings down the end of this column here. But we need to understand our ring position, the game state. That means what the score is, what is available, what is the time on the scoreboard, etc. So these are moments where we need to kind of have a quick moment of what happens next to be able to consider what is the best plan of action, as Adrian alluded to. So that's very, very important. Decision flips then for us, what this means is most of the time there's going to be someone in control of the match. So it's very important for you to be able to sway this control and have ways of doing this. So we speak about in our other episodes the triad of control, distance, tempo, and ring positioning. So you need to be able to flip it on its head to be able to pull this and drag this around to make it not so comfortable for your opponent when they are in control.
We then jump into the number of flags in play, and for us this means that at the end of the match, one of the 4 corner flags, let's say, is within 1 score, so within a 3-point score of being changed to the other direction. So this tells us that at the end of the average match, there are still 2 flags in play, which means the match can at least be brought back to a draw. If all 4 flags were against you and you can turn 2 into your favor, the match could be brought back to a draw. So that's very, very significant. And it makes sense considering these were high level matches, typically semi-finals and finals of championships. So the matches were close.
Yeah, and flags in play then as well, Adrian, means that we have to be able to be aware of what the warnings are for you if you're winning, and also on the flip side if you need to go and get them. So that's a very, very important factor of this. And you need to be good at closing out matches on both winning and the losing side. So that's something that you should practice if you want to be able to compete at this high level, to be able to balance that when it comes down to the last maybe 30 seconds.
The number of exchanges is about 18. So this is where both competitors would trade. So this isn't, we don't really look at single shots for this. We're looking for where both competitors are engaged. Someone has got into contact and the other person has responded. And, you know, just short of 20 exchanges in 240 seconds, it's quite a busy time. So it does mean that there will be periods of calm in most matches, and a lot of the techniques that are used will be thrown within exchanges.
Yeah, and the exchanges then is all about being first in and last out. So if you've seen any of our videos to date, we do track this as well in individual fights. So this is a very important factor. If you're the first one into contact, you're going to have an advantage, but it's nearly more important to be the last one in contact. So if you're the last one to make that big shot and then exit out of contact safely, there's a big chance that you're going to get the return for that. If we look at the techniques thrown per person at the top of this, 48, and then exchange is 18, that will give a rough two, on average 2 there if you divide both of those numbers. So every time you do throw, you're looking to at least get 2 shots going together, not just singles ideally. And we'll see in a while why that's important as well when we look at the percentage of techniques that are actually being scored based on how many are being thrown.
Yeah, we're going to see as well in a bit more detail, but there's about 6 techniques on average used across competitors. So while we have a huge range of shots, they're not all thrown, but there is almost like a basic entry level to play. So you need to have the most common 4 or 5 shots before you can really play effectively. After that, the rest is for individual flavor. Although we will show you that some people who specialize in particular techniques are inordinately effective when they use them.
Yeah, and then that finally brings us down to the warnings conceded. We have 4.3 is the average, so that means usually 1 deduction on your flag, because every 3 warnings take 1 point deduction from every single flag in each corner. So that's the average that we see from the matches that we have looked at. We have looked at junior, senior, pre-junior, male, female, and a variety of weight categories. So this is a little bit of an average for sure, but not a massive data set with 24, but we're looking to continue this, but just bringing you guys some numbers here based on those ones that we have tracked. Now we're getting into the more juicy numbers and the juicy stats next.
So yeah, we're looking at in this slide, it's which shots are used most often, and we're seeing at the end of the graph there is 20 being kind of the average for a front leg carry. So these are still averages across all 24 matches. We're looking at the instances or the frequency of these shots being used, and then we're dividing it down by the number of matches. So what we're seeing there is front leg carry being thrown, let's say 20 times and making contact about 5 times. So that kind of thing. And we can see that the majority of the work is being done with that front leg carry, the turning kick with the lead leg, or sorry, turning kick with either leg, side kick, and the hands.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, what we do see as well here is that obviously the front leg carry that we've alluded to previously is mostly used to maintain and control distance, and also to relieve pressure a lot of time, as well as to get yourself a little bit closer to be able to set up a follow-on shot. But what this does tell us is that you need an answer to both of these on both sides. So front leg carry, turning kick, side kick, and hands. Just with those alone, you need to have an answer you need to be able to at least match your opponent, because they're happening so often. And it's also a good plan to have counters and strategies to be able to come up with somebody who is very, very dominant or successful with these variety of techniques. So if you have somebody who's really good with front leg carry, you need to be able to deal with that problem, because we can see how often it happens.
Yeah, these are things that you just can't ignore. They are going to be in the game. We're going to see a lot of them. But then it brings up the second question, which is, well, of these shots, how many are, how successful are people when they throw them? So in this one, we're looking at the flipping it and just looking at the percentage of time that the shot is thrown and it makes contact. So it's very similar to the previous slide in some ways, but we can see where the percentage success rate for a front leg carry, for example, is only about 20%. So 4 out of 5 times it hits thin air, but it does create the movement, it does create the control of space and so on that we're looking for. We're starting to see some very interesting ones though, where we have to take a few things into consideration. So for example, about 70% success rate when people go to hands, that just means that they get into contact. And by the nature of it, people aren't going to throw hands from a very far distance, so they will usually end up in contact. It doesn't really explain how often they're scored or how high a number of points that you score with hands, but it does tend to say that, look, if people are willing to go to hands, if people do go to hands, there's a very good chance that you're going to be getting into contact and likely picking up scores from there.
Yeah, the interesting part here as well is that if we look down towards the end of this slide, we can see some of the things that aren't thrown that often, but are quite successful when they are. So that just alludes to the fact that if you have a little bit of variety in your back pocket and you can pull out some different techniques that aren't really that common, most of the time you're going to be able to use it effectively and get into contact. Now, nobody's going to really be throwing shots they're not comfortable with. So obviously it's something that they have and they're confident in. But also at the same time, it means that on the other side, and we flip this on its head, most people aren't going to be expecting these shots always. As we see, there's like an average of 6 variety of different techniques people use. So if you throw that to 7 or 8, there's a chance that you might be able to get success with it because it's not something people are expecting.
Yeah, I mean, I think the blitz, to some degree, the axe kick, and certainly the back kick and the reverse turning kick are really quite impressive there, because we're finding, examples where, okay, a 50% success rate on reverse turning kick and back kick, for example, that's alarmingly high in a way. That, if the person has it, that 1 out of every 2 they throw might actually make contact is a big, big, big deal. And with the blitz, even more, closer to 70%. So if the person is a proficient blitzer, if we're thinking the Annie's Trickeries, the guys like that, where it's in their wheelhouse, they are effective at it, those are the ones who throw it. And when they throw it, it's like, it's so successful so much of the time that it has to be considered a real threat. But even from the point of view of the axe kick, if it's only successful 30% of the time, but 30% of the time is 3 points, it becomes a very efficient shot to use. So there's a little bit to think about these ones, and we will have to break these down in more detail and look at them across the different divisions, across the different across male and female, and even as we start to get a better look at the scoring outcome of particular shots. Now that we can see the scores live, we may be able to answer better what the scoring return on some of these is in the future.
Yeah. So warnings, big factor. So all these little bars along the right-hand side are each individual matches, and they go up to as far as 12. So there was 1 DQ in the data set, as it says here on the left. So on average, winners conceded 1.4 deductions. So remember, 3 warnings is a deduction. And we compare that to 1.55 for losers. But we did mention before we came on, we had a little chat about this. What we think here is why these are so important is because coming into the end of a match, if you have warnings to spare, or if warnings are a factor of you having a score flipped, then this is where it really matters more so than actually being ahead or having less than the other person. So it's more important to not go over 5 if you can. And we can see 80% of winners from the matches that we have looked at conceded less than 6 warnings. So that suggests that they have that extra warning to give towards the end of the fight. And also they didn't give 2 deductions. So it's not just about deductions. It's also having a safety margin towards the end of the fight to be able to pull away and to be able to maintain your win as you're coming into the dying moments. Because we can see that most matches do come down to 2 flags being in play at the end, which will make a difference in the overall result of a fight.
It is worth noting that, we don't have enough data as yet to be starting to exclude outliers in particular sets, but we can definitely say that this particular set has been influenced by Finn Martin and James Toot, who had 11 and 12 warnings respectively in 2 of their matches, but they tend to score an awful lot of head kicks as well. So it's one of those things where, in the future, when we have hundreds of data points, we might be starting to exclude a couple of these outliers. We might see a better, a more standard kind of curve to it. But I think that general message of, look, staying under the 6 warnings gives you a much increased chance of being in a winning position I think it's a good habit to form.
And if you step out of the ring, make sure kick them in the head a lot.
Yes, yeah, it's going to be needed. So ignore the graph on the right for just a second, but that's kind of just looking at each individual match that we had data on. But it's only in the last 7 or 8 matches that we started to track the average score across the 4 flags in your favor, against you, and the winning or losing margin. So this gets a little bit more interesting as we look at the work rate. We were talking about, Richie, earlier, 50 shots thrown on average. 20%, or sorry, 40% of those coming into contact, so maybe 20 shots per match coming into contact. And we're saying that winners on average score about 5 points per judge.
Yeah. So if you're looking to score 5 points and you're throwing on average 50 shots to get that, that's a 10% return. So that's just on scoring, not contact rate. So then if you're getting into contact 20% of the time, then 50% of those shots you're scoring. So, we need to, not 50%, even less. So
we're looking at landing about 20 shots per match, and in terms of making contact, and those
so 20
contacts leading to about 5 points per corner.
Yeah, exactly. So what does this tell us? It means that you need to be able to throw a lot of shots to be able to get yourself in a position to be able to score shots on a judge's card. If you're a counter fighter, or if you're a very low volume fighter, you better be sure that you're very, very accurate and precise, because on the law of averages, what we see here, it says that you're not going to be successful in getting enough points on the card. So obviously we can see here most people have a margin of victory of 2. So you really need to be able to build those scores and not concede. Obviously, that's the aim of the game: hit and don't get hit. But how do you do it? You need to throw more shots, which then puts more potential of you getting the contact, which then gives you more potential to be able to land a percentage of those shots and get the return on the scorecards, which at the end of the day is the winning and the losing of fights.
Absolutely. So with that in mind, we had a little bit of a comparison between the work rate, the contact rate, and the efficiency of different fighters. So the very first big headline there, 90%, 96% chance of winning if you make more contacts. But let's talk about how we got there. The first thing is that efficiency. So that's where we look at the number of shots you land compared to the number of shots you throw. And whether you're winning or losing, the efficiency across these high-level performances is about 40%. So that means they are, for every 100 that they throw, they're landing 40. And what that means is, if there's no difference between the winners and losers in terms of their efficiency, it means that when we look at it, winners are able to maintain that efficiency across a higher work rate, throwing more shots and making more contact.
Yeah, and obviously this is not red and blue here, just so people know as well for context. This is the blue diagram here are the winners, correct, Adrian? And the red is the people who lost their fight. So it's not the corner color or anything like that. It's just the colors that we've chosen for this. So if you are the winner, most of the time, on average, you're throwing around 54 shots. If you're losing fights, you're down around that 42. So that's the first thing that we need to try and fix. You need to throw more shots if you want to win more fights. Ideally, you need to throw more than your opponent. And like, this is simple as well. When we bring it all back into first principles, hit and don't get hit. So that's the aim of the game. And then if we bring that down into the next factor, you need to make more contact. And that brings us up to that yellow sentence here, which is a nice takeaway from this video, I think. If you get more contact, there's a 96% chance of you winning the fight. And what is that? For all the fights that we have tracked, there's only been one instance where the person who won made less contact. Now, their efficiency rate was very, very high, but also it was only 1 in 4. So 4% chance, 1 in our data set was an example of where this happened. The work rate, we're looking for 1 shot on average every 5 seconds if you want to be successful. So you can't be lazy. You can't be just waiting on the fight to come to you. You have to be more proactive. We always make this point that if you want to be able to win fights, you have to be the one who takes the fight and takes control. You can't be sitting back and waiting, because it allows the other person to build their work rate. And then Adrian already spoke about the efficiency and what that means.
Yeah, absolutely. So, folks, there's a lot of takeaways for us in this one. And I mean, I think the biggest thing is having those numbers lets us better describe what our game is. Okay, so we can talk about how busy do you have to be? How many times do you have to make certain decisions? How many warnings can you afford to concede? How many fouls can you afford to concede? What are the things that you can train for or try to do in your sparring that give you the best chance of winning? And look, as we're summarizing it right now, that last line is maybe the simplest one. You need to have a higher work rate than your opponent. You need to throw more shots, get more of those into contact, and maintain the same rate of efficiency as someone who's throwing less shots than you. So we're hoping that we're going to see, as we look at individuals, we'll see people who stand out because, well, their efficiency rate is so high, they're hitting 50 or 60%, that they can afford to have a slightly lower work rate. Okay, fantastic. But we'll know that they're the outlier because the average is something else. So we hope to be able to make better statements over the months and years to come about why particular competitors are interesting, different, impressive, less impressive, based on what the norms are.
Yeah, so as we said, we're just getting started with this. We said we'd share them publicly with you as we're learning ourselves. So we're going to keep studying fights. We're going to keep trying to pull learnings and findings from what we see, the trends and things like that we see at Euros, Worlds, cycling through each campaign. So I hope you enjoyed this one. If you do, or if you have any suggestions or other stats you think that might be effective or something worth tracking, let us know in the comments. And hopefully the next time we do this type of video, we'll have even more data and even more interesting findings for everybody in the ITF world.
See you next time.
See you then.